Okay, this is back to back with the last one, and I'm going to start with my idea of plots as threads, or vice versa. Threads of reality as plots from a story. And I know that's weird to analyze. And actually, this was starting to dawn on me when I first came across this idea in chapter 10 of my book. And actually, I think all the things were set into place a bit before that. There's this. I'll start with. There's like two or three ideas going on here. Why I think this. And okay, for those of you who don't know who I am Aaron Klein. I'm just a guy saying his thoughts. I'm going down more of a theological exploration right now into the understanding of God. Yeah, that's the best I can do for you for right now. Today I'm wanting to talk about when I what I think is going on with stories. I think that plots you can see plots as thread. In fact, the definition I gave in the last episode is the line you take towards your calling is from where you start, usually from a fallen state, is a thread, the thread of plot. And I have this joke with my friend. There have been stories that have come out in anime where the main protagonist has no powers, yet he goes, like, this is a common occurrence lately. The guy has no powers, but he goes to, like, a magical school or whatever, and he participates in, even though it's clear he knows no magic, he still, through whatever, he's basically using plot magic to get through the story. And it's really, it's seen as it's seen as sort of like almost a joke. It's a comedy on the idea of magic. And I think it's funny, but I came up with this idea of plot magic. I came up with this idea a couple months ago. So I used it, and he laughed really hard. It spooked his dogs a little bit, and it was funny. But there's this idea that I would like to think of as the one of the strongest powers that humans have is the ability to understand story plots and weave them together to tell their own stories. Sort of something like that. It's not even close to perfect, but there's this underflowing idea of we understand archetypes. This is the Jungian idea of archetypes. We know archetypes, and we don't just know, my claim is we don't just know archetypes of individuals, but also of events and meta events, which we call plots. So, like, there's subplots within a story. You have these short little stories which string together to create a larger story. Then you have these larger stories string together to create like a meta story. Or you can also think of it as, like, this is my thought, that a hero from the biblical sense is someone who can weave together story plots such that they create a cloak of many colors. They wear their stories as plot magic. I'm using all this language kind of loosely because I'm not entirely. This idea just came up, and it's an interesting idea. And this is where I'm going to read a short story from the Bible. I'm going to read I'm going to start in Genesis 37. I'm going to read I'm going to read the first 20 verses. I'll be as quick as possible about it. Jacob lived in the land of his father's sojournings in the land of Canaan. There are generations of Jacob, blah blah blah. Now Israel loved Joseph more than any of his sons, because he was the son of his old age, and he made him a robe of many colors. Then I'm going to skip because this is very close afterwards. No, I'm not even going to skip. I'm just going to continue. That was verse 3. Israel loved Joseph more than any of his sons, because he was the son of his old age, and he made him a robe of many colors. Verse 4. But when his brothers saw that their father loved him more than all of his brothers, they hated him and could not speak peacefully to him. 5. Now Joseph had a dream, and when he told it to his brothers, they hated him. 6. He said to them, hear this dream that I have dreamed. 7. Behold, we were binding sheaves in the field, and behold, my sheaf arose and stood upright, and behold, your sheaves gathered around it and bowed to my sheaf. Then 9. Then he dreamed another dream and told it to his brothers, and said, behold, I have dreamed another dream. Behold, the sun, the moon, and 11 stars were bowing down to me. But when he told it to his father and to his brothers, his father rebuked him and said to him, what is this dream that you have dreamed? Shall I and your mother and your brothers indeed come to bow ourselves to the ground before you? And his brothers were jealous of him, but his father kept the saying in mind. And then it immediately goes into his brothers selling him for some silver. I believe it was 20 pieces of silver. In verse 27, come, let's sell him to the Ishmaelites, and let not our hand be upon him, for he is our brother, our own flesh. And his brothers listened to him. This is Judah. Then Midianite traders passed by, and they drew Joseph up and lifted him out of the pit and sold him to the Ishmaelites for 20 shekels of silver. They took Joseph to Egypt. And then it continues. I'm going to include verse 31 here. Then they, which is the brothers, took Joseph's robe and slaughtered a goat and dipped the robe in the blood. They sent the robe of many colors and brought it to their father and said, this we have found. Please identify whether it is your son's robe or not. And he identified it and said, it is my son's robe. A fierce animal has devoured him. Joseph is without doubt torn to pieces. Then Jacob tore his garments and put sackcloth on his loins and mourned for his son many days. Okay, I know that was a long stretch there, but hear me out. I think there's a couple story elements here. First, the coat of many colors is that same idea. I think that it is a continuation of a hero story, because Israel is he who wrestled with God, which is a descendant of Abraham. These are people who had their names changed. Remember, it went from Abram to Abraham, Jacob to Israel. So what this looks like is an evolution in the hero story from Abraham being the great father and like, I think it's from father of many to no, it is from great father to father of many, or vice versa, something like that. He's the initial patriarch. He's the one that got called to being a hero, and he ends up having to. God calls him to sacrifice his son, and God spares him. But there's this idea of you have to teach your children your lessons, or else they will perish under them, under the things that you were trying to teach them. I think that's one of the issues going on there, but we're going to skip past that. There's an evolution here. I think that in the next generation of Israel, one of the biggest adventures you can have is to wrestle with your belief in God. And not just your belief, but your beliefs, and to be able to ask God why. Like, it's appropriate to ask why. It's appropriate to get angry and to wrestle with God. Don't separate your connection with him, but you should have a conversation with the metaphysical, with the, I'm trying to get the right words here. It's okay to have a disagreement and to wrestle with the ideas of the metaconsciousness. And it will hurt you. Right? Like, that's what Israel means, to wrestle with. And Israel sprained his ankle. He had a permanent... When he wrestled with the Spirit of God, it permanently damaged his ankle while doing it. Like, you will get hurt when wrestling with God, but it means at least you wrestled with him. To wrestle with the truth, to wrestle with reality. And then the next idea that comes up, it's not said, but there's this idea of Israel giving his son a coat of many colors, and then that's, in one way, that is sort of like the hero becomes the wise sage, like the Gandalf figure. Gandalf was a hero of old that grew old and tried to pass down his wisdom and a calling to Bilbo and to Frodo. I'm using those because those are popular. Those are popular. That's a popular story of present. But there's this idea that he's giving his wisdom and his tools to his son to continue his legacy. And now the son has to go on another adventure. This is where I'm saying that maybe part of that same idea of the thread that you follow in your search for the calling that you get from the unconsuming fire of God, that calling that you get, that those threads you can weave together as a tool. And once you understand the process of reality, once you understand the symbolism that is involved, you can start predicting more and more things. I know this idea is really poorly put together, but I'm willing to at least start it out and then people can build on it. And then on top of that, once you have the ability to weave together story elements, you can use those story elements as a tool of writing your own story. And it's not at all surprising to me that his brothers immediately turn on him, and as a story plot, mind you, like as a piece of the story, they turn on him. He tells them something to get himself not killed, but sold off into captivity, right? And in doing so, he, like, by that, God uses him and the tragedy of that existence. I'll use those words because I haven't scripted this out, remember? He uses the tragedy of that circumstance to allow a story progression. And Joseph continues to fall into despair and to lean on God and to his tools available to him. And he interprets dreams. Let me make this very clear. Like, one of the things he is a dream interpreter. So this is like a Jungian archetypal dream interpreter. So this is where I think that he has when his father gave him the cloak of many colors, he became aware of archetypes and repeatable story elements. And I think that's one of his, like, that gift from his father is the thing that gave him the most power, because he was able to lean on that and on God, and he was able to make a name of himself before he got kicked down again. And God used the tragedy of circumstances to continue to put Joseph in better and better situations, so that way he could achieve a great. God put him in dire circumstances for the opportunities, so that way he could reach higher with every opportunity he had to interpret dreams. And in fact, I think dream interpretation is a very powerful tool, because the most important stories are dreamlike. And what I mean by that is, if you look at Genesis, if you read Genesis, if you if you don't have the ability to tease out the elements within it, it reads like a creation story, which it is, but it also once you are able to tease out the elements, you can start to piece together other information from within the story. So the story of Cain and Abel, it's not just Cain killed Abel. It's a battle that we all take as we are living in this world. We all take that battle within ourselves. And it's when we sin that we kill our highest standard. Like, that's the worst sin that we could have. Like, that's the Jewish biggest sin. It's not just murder. It's murder of your best standard. It's murder of your beneficial adversary that's calling you to do better. Something like that. And it's not, like, I could agree, I don't know if I necessarily do, with Jordan Peterson's idea of these people that are the most deserving, that are the most intelligent. I don't agree with that, because I don't think, like, I think he had rose-tinted goggles on when he was going through Harvard as a professor. Besides that, because, like, I know that's me exposing my bias. But that's okay, because we're all human, we all have bias. But that's beside the point. There's this idea that I believe he got the gift of dream interpretation, and by doing so, he was able to understand not just archetypes, like archetypes of people within stories, but archetypes of story plots, things that can happen to you. So he was able to lean on God, who gave him that gift, and because of that, he was able to eventually become second in command only to Pharaoh. With this meta idea that, there's this idea in Egyptian mythology that the Pharaoh is embodying, I think, Horus, the all-seeing eye at the top of the pyramid. And when you're second in command to only Horus, like, that is basically saying that God has blessed you and he has given you power up to but not exceeding him. Like, he's given you immense power, more than anyone else on the planet, right? Something like that. I think that's what is being said here, is it's not about, I don't think the story is actually about competence. I think it's about the meta understanding of that comes with, like, I think competence plays a role here, but I think the story has more to do with I think I know what it is. There's another pagan story, or not even a pagan story. It's an old English story about Jack and the Beanstalk. I think this is completely. I think they overlap in the same way that the Garden of Eden overlaps with Pandora's box. There's this idea that as you climb the hierarchy, you stop relying on competence at some point, and once you have learned the meta, there's this thing that allows you to climb all competence hierarchies, and that is the pattern of existence. And I think that overlays completely. I think that the hero story leads to a meta understanding of the universe. And I don't mean that in like a Gnostic idea. I mean like, how do I put this? I don't think that I could physically move a mountain, but you can convince a lot more people. Like, you can do a whole lot more convincing with storytelling and and you can do the best storytelling possible through critical analysis with the intention of reconstructing stories. I think that the storyteller is one of the most powerful people on the planet, because they can convince the most people to do the most compelling things. I think that's close enough language for what I'm getting at here. I think this is where it actually leads to. The idea of the coat of many colors is the same as the lute at the lute, Lute, as in like as a musical instrument. The golden lute, or whatever it is, at the top of the Beanstalk in the Giant's Kingdom at the final time. I think that they are the exact same thing. And you notice how they both use strings. I think the ability to understand how the universe works as a symbolic pattern system changes the way you view reality. And it brings you to I wouldn't call it a meta, like I would call it there's a competence outside of competence. There's this idea that the understanding of symbolism makes you more competent than the most competent person in the room. Because while they are the best at what they do in that one topic, you are good at all things, right? There's this idea of this is sort of close to Jordan Peterson's idea of IQ, but I think his idea of IQ is kind of flawed. I think there's this idea that once you've mastered the ability to understand story elements and to tell your own stories, you are one of the most powerful people in the entire world. Like that combination with leadership means that you can rule a kingdom. Like I think this is it. I think that with the fear of God, if you are capable of understanding the symbolism, you can draw wisdom from the stories. You can draw wisdom from divine stories, like like Cain and Abel, and you can be the best ruler God can give to his people. And there's this idea that God is above the hierarchy. God is the all-seeing eye. Like that's one of the ideas here. And I think that we had to use Egypt as a tool to get this story. I think that's what had to happen. I think we had to use Egypt as a tool to get this story, because then Joseph could be second only to God from an Egyptian sense. And what I mean by that is, if you put God at the top of your hierarchy, if you put God above everything else, and all your people do, especially your king, if your king puts God above everything else, it doesn't matter how do I put this? If the king can put God at the top of everything else, he will be the best servant. And in fact, any leader who does this will make the best out of any situation. The fear of God as a leader is the best way to serve and to be served. That's not perfect, but the best tool you can have as a leader is the ability to interpret stories and to be able to it's a C word again that I want to use the word compel, but it's not compel. You can convince. The best way to convince your people is to tell them the right story. I think that's it. And I think that if you fear God, you tell them the truth. So there's a bit of that in there too. It's not perfect, but there's this idea that if you understand story elements, you can convince your people to do the things that you need them to do. And that only works when you fear God first and foremost. I think like that overlapping of Joseph in the Coat of Many Colors with the Beanstalk story. I keep forgetting. It overlaps pretty well, and I think that identifies a whole, like, I think that dialogue between those two stories, because they overlap so well, they're like almost mirrors. I think that helps identify more important elements within both stories. And it's like this idea within the Beanstalk story that you climb, like the more hierarchies you climb, the easier it is to see it's the easier it is to find the ideas that let you climb all hierarchies. And that's sort of like this pursuit of God. Sort of. Yeah, this is much shorter, thankfully. If you like the ideas I'm trying to pave out through this series of my pursuit of the truth and my pursuit of the divine, please consider subscribing, liking, commenting. If you disagree with me at all, please comment. It sucks that I find these cool interplays as I get later into, like, it sucks that I find these interplays late into my discussion, but the idea of climbing the hierarchies of the Bible and climbing the hierarchies of, climbing the hierarchies of the Beanstalk, I think that those two overlay perfectly. So yeah, thank you for watching, and I'll hopefully see you next time.